response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. The New Deal was aggressive legislation It was President Abraham Lincoln, in his 1863 Gettysburg Address, who declared our government to be of the people, by the people, for the people. But how did we get to this democratic government? The early American colonists were still governed by British Parliament and English laws. Many colonists felt oppressed by Britain's continued efforts to tax them and restrict their trade. The backlash against British rule spawned the Patriot movement, which was an effort to protest Britain's rules and to secure more freedoms for the colonists. Tensions escalated between the American colonists and the British government for several years before the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775. This was a war waged by American colonists against British rule. The Patriot movement spawned the war, but it's important to note that the war wasn't originally about independence. The colonists' original goal was to fight for the rights to which they felt they were already entitled. Though not the original intent, by mid-1776, the war became a process of creating a new and free nation for the colonists. The colonists grew frustrated and saw no other viable solution. In May 1776, the Continental Congress endorsed overthrowing existing royal governments. The Congress served as the general political body and was already meeting before the war. Every colony that did not yet have a patriot government established one, and they began calling themselves states. In June, a committee of congressmen led by Thomas Jefferson met to draft the Declaration of Independence. When the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration on July 4, 1776, the 13 American colonies officially severed their political connection to Great Britain. However, the war didn't end until 1783. After the war, the colonists were no longer ruled by the royal authority of England or by the colonial charter. The immediate priority was the formation of a new government, though the colonists already had some governmental processes in place even before the war. Let's look at those processes. In the colonies, the Patriot movement spawned the creation of individual state constitutions. In 1777, Congress recognized the need for clearly written national governing rules and drafted the Articles of Confederation. The Articles served as our nation's first constitution, though this document was limited. It mostly set out the way Congress had already been operating for at least 2 years. Nevertheless, the states did not finish the ratification of the Articles, making them official, until 1781. The Articles of Confederation formalized our national government, but did not provide for much power. The Articles purposely allowed the individual states more power than the federal government. For example, Congress could pass laws, but it had no power to force the states to follow those laws. It's helpful to remember that many colonists felt England's rules were too harsh and restricting. Therefore, they feared providing their new government with too much power over the people. But Congress soon recognized the inherent difficulty with having a federal government that was too weak. They needed to find a middle ground. They knew the Articles needed to be revised. Meanwhile, the new states already had their own constitutions. Remember that many states started using constitutions several years before the end of the Revolutionary War. The state constitutions largely served to place the majority of power in the hands of state legislatures, which were made up of many representatives. This took the emphasis off the role of individual governors in an attempt to keep any one person from possessing too much power. Our constitutional framers looked to these state models and decided that this type of constitution would be necessary for the new federal government. Following an idea used in the Massachusetts Constitution, our nation's leaders made the Articles of Confederation changeable only through constitutional convention. This meant each state was required to send representatives back to Philadelphia for a large meeting. These leaders met with the intention to modify the Articles, but ended up drafting a completely new document. A revised system of government was introduced through the United States Constitution. The Constitution was designed to limit the power of government while ensuring basic personal rights for American citizens. The new government would be based on democratic principles. These principles placed the emphasis on the good of the people, allowing their participation while protecting their individual rights. The Constitution was drafted in 1787. It was centered on this theme: government should be run by the people, for the people. This was a popular Patriot idea reflected in the state constitutions, but the congressmen initially differed on how that goal should be achieved for the federal government. After much argument, the Constitution was finalized. However, it couldn't be used until 9 of the 13 colonies ratified it. This was a challenge as many states still did not agree with the Constitution. For example, the larger states of Virginia and New York felt that they should have more power than the smaller states, and many colonists still felt that the federal government was not necessary at all. The Constitution gained support once the first 10 amendments were added. These amendments are known as the Bill of Rights and serve to guarantee citizens certain individual liberties. These are the liberties the colonists felt were most important and must be protected from obstruction by the new government. Though a system of government was already in place, the United States Congress ratified the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Under this treaty, the Revolutionary War officially ended, and Great Britain finally recognized the United States as an independent nation. This new nation reached as far west as the Mississippi River and as far south as Florida. The U.S. was now expansive and free to make and enforce laws as the citizens saw fit. Let's review. The Patriot movement was an effort to protest Britain's rule and to secure more freedoms for the colonists. The movement marked tensions between the American colonists and the British government, which carried on for several years before the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775. This was a war waged by American colonists against British rule. In 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Through the Declaration, the 13 American colonies officially severed their political connection to Great Britain. The Patriot movement then brought about the use of state constitutions and our nation's first constitution, the Articles of Confederation. In 1787, a proposed revision to the Articles resulted in the United States Constitution, which was designed to limit the power of government while ensuring basic personal rights for American citizens. The Constitution was ratified after the Bill of Rights was added. These are the first 10 amendments, which serve to guarantee citizens certain individual liberties. These documents focused on democratic principles, which place emphasis on the good of the people, allowing their participation while protecting their individual rights. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war, and Great Britain finally recognized the United States as an independent nation.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Unless you are in the 4th grade, you will probably never be asked to recite this again, but it is important for people to understand the stated purpose of the Constitution. In this lesson, we will go over the original 7 articles of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This is a great deal of information. For the sake of student sanity, we will mainly focus on a clear and simple understanding of the first 3 articles, which form the 3 branches of the U.S. government: the legislative, executive, and the judicial. Then we'll more quickly cover the rest. Article 1 of the Constitution establishes the legislative branch of our government. This is the Congress. The Constitution establishes 2 houses for the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The primary purpose of the Congress is to make laws. In the House, representatives are elected every 2 years and must be at least 25 years old, have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years, and must reside in the state from which they are chosen. The House has the sole power of impeachment. This means that the House can put the President on trial for breaking the law. In the Senate, senators are elected every 6 years, must be at least 30 years old, have been a U.S. citizen for 9 years, and must reside in the state from which they are chosen. The Vice President of the United States is the President of the Senate, but the VP has no vote unless there is a tie that needs to be broken. The Senate holds the trial if the House chooses to impeach the President. The punishment can only go as far as throwing the President out of office and barring them from holding other government offices. According to Article 1, it is also Congress's job to raise money, so that means tax, and pay U.S. debts. And it is Congress's job to provide for defense, which means maintain the military. Article 2 of the Constitution establishes the executive branch of the government. That means the President. The President's job is to enforce the laws established by Congress. The President is elected for a 4-year term and must be a natural-born U.S. citizen, as outlined under Section 1, Clause 5. However, it is important to note that there is a statute built into the Constitution that allows for foreign-born Americans to run for President. The following must be true. The individual must be born to at least one parent who was born on U.S. soil, and the individual had to be born within a possession of the United States. A great example was Arizona Senator John McCain, who ran for president in 2008. McCain was born in Panama. Fortunately, he was born on an American air base inside of the Panama Canal Zone, which just happened to be an American possession at the time of his birth. Additionally, to be president, a person also has to be at least 35 years old and must have been residing in the U.S. for a period of 14 years. The Constitution is very vague as to whether the 14 years must be consecutive or in general. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the military, has power to make treaties with the consent of the Senate, has the power to pardon and appoint ambassadors, judges, and other officials, but these appointments must be approved by Congress. The judicial branch of the government is established by the 3rd Article of the Constitution. The job of the judicial branch of the government is to interpret the law. The judicial branch of the government is made up of the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts. The Supreme Court deals with cases involving constitutional law, treaties, ambassadors, and cases outside of state jurisdiction, like maritime cases, cases between states, or cases between individuals in another state. Judges appointed to the Supreme Court serve for life. So the first 3 articles of the Constitution establish the branches of the U.S. government: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. This brilliant system is designed to divide the powers of the government so that each branch keeps the others in check. The Congress makes laws, but the President can veto those laws, and if the President does sign those laws, the courts can find those laws unconstitutional and render them void. Congress can override a presidential veto, but the courts can still knock them down. If the courts keep rendering laws void, the Congress can amend the Constitution under Article 5, which we will address shortly. We will now take a look at Articles 4 through 7. Article 4. Relationship of the states and admitting new states, establishes the relationship between states and the federal government. It says that states have to honor the laws of other states. As an example, if a couple is married in New York, their marriage is also recognized in Virginia. It also outlines the rules for admitting new states to the Union. Article 5, Amending the Constitution, establishes the amending process for the Constitution. Article 5 states that the proposal of an amendment can be done by a 2/3 majority vote in both the House and the Senate. This is the most common method of drafting an amendment. Interestingly, it can also be done with 2/3 vote by the state legislatures. This would then require Congress to hold a constitutional convention to address the state proposed amendments. For ratification, the amendment needs to be approved by 3/4 majority of the state legislatures. Article 6, highest law of the land, says that the Constitution is the highest law of the land. Federal and state officers and judges must uphold the Constitution. Article 7, Just Names, is just all the guys who signed the Constitution. It just confirms the ratification of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is very important. Every American, whether able to recite them or not, enjoys the protections laid out by the Founders, and the Constitution would never have been signed without these first amendments. There were originally 12 amendments, but it was the right-assuring list of 10 that made it into the Constitution. This is one of the most important documents in history, and we just covered it in less than 10 minutes. Most importantly, it establishes the three branches of government. Article 1 establishes the legislature, Article 2 establishes the executive, or the office of the president, and Article 3 establishes the judiciary. Then, equally important, was the addition of the Bill of Rights, which all citizens should familiarize themselves with. Many founders fought to assure that these rights would be guaranteed to all U.S. citizens.
We the people. Do you recognize these three important words? These are the first few words of the preamble to our United States Constitution. With these three words, our constitutional framers declared that our government exists only because the people of the U.S. authorize it to exist. Our United States government system is known as a limited government. This means our government has only those powers the people have specifically authorized. Our government receives its power and authority from the people and has only those limited powers the people have expressly given to it. The Constitution creates our federal government. When reading the Constitution, you'll notice that it sets out the form of the federal government, then lays out all the things the federal government cannot do. For example, the First Amendment reads, "Congress shall make no law." The Second Amendment says the people's right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Think of the Constitution as mostly a list of don'ts rather than a list of do's. Our limited government is based on federalism. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. In the U.S., people are subject to the governmental powers of both the federal government and their state governments. The Constitution expressly grants some fairly broad powers to the federal government, but not to the states. For example, Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress the right to coin money and declare war. The following section prohibits the states from coining money or declaring war. Remember that the Constitution stresses what the states can't do. This is our limited government at work. However, the addition of the Bill of Rights, including the 10th Amendment, helps the states out of it. The 10th Amendment gives the states all powers not delegated to the national government or specifically denied to the states. In other words, under federalism, the states can regulate whatever is left over. The Constitution acknowledges that state laws will play the largest role in governing the people on a day-to-day basis. In this way, the Constitution gives great leeway to the states to determine how to best govern their people, as long as the states obey the list of don'ts. The Supremacy Clause is also an important part of our limited government. This clause is the section of the Constitution stating that the Constitution and federal laws are the supreme law of the land. The constitutional framers wanted to ensure that the states wouldn't overpower the federal government. The Supremacy Clause is a guarantee that no laws will interfere with the goals of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause is found in Article 6, Section 2, where the Constitution specifies which powers the federal government has and which powers the federal government does not have. When a state law conflicts with a federal law, the Supremacy Clause operates to invalidate the state law in favor of the federal one, as long as the federal law is found to be in pursuance of the Constitution. Notice that the Supremacy Clause operates to further limit state governments. It means that states can't regulate, interfere with, or control federal issues. This principle is exemplified in the famous 1819 Supreme Court case of McCulloch v. Maryland. In this case, the court held that Maryland could not constitutionally tax the operations of the Bank of the United States, since that was a federal power. The Constitution's separation of powers further operates to limit governmental powers. This is the division of state and federal government into three different branches. The Constitution's Article 1 lists the rights of the legislative branch. Article 2 lists the rights of the executive branch. And Article 3 lists the rights of the judiciary branch. Under this separation of powers, each of the three branches operates independently. Each branch has its own set of functions and cannot assume a function that is reserved to another branch. Each branch holds checks and balances over the other two branches. This means each branch has functions that help prevent the others from assuming too much power. For example, the legislative branch, or Congress, makes our federal laws. Before these laws can be enforced, the laws must be authorized or signed into law by the President. The President is the head of our executive branch. The laws can be declared unconstitutional by the judiciary branch, which is headed by the U.S. Supreme Court. If a law is declared unconstitutional, it cannot be enforced. This is what happened to Maryland's tax law in McCulloch v. Maryland. Let's review. Our United States government is a limited government, which means our government has only those powers the people have authorized. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. In the U.S., this means that the federal government and state governments share powers over the citizens. Powers are divided between these two. However, the Constitution's Supremacy Clause tells us that federal laws will usually supersede state laws. The Supremacy Clause ensures that the Constitution is the highest or supreme law. The 10th Amendment gives some power back to the states, though only those powers that were not already granted to the federal government. The Constitution's separation of powers further operates to limit governmental powers. The separation of powers describes the division of state and federal government into three different branches. The independent branches are the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch. Each branch holds checks and balances over the other two branches, meaning each branch has functions that help prevent the others from assuming too much power. Our United States Constitution has been in operation since 1789. That's well over 200 years. But it's only been changed a handful of times. With all the cultural changes we've experienced over the last 200 years, why has the Constitution stayed largely the same? When we make a change or addition to the United States Constitution, it's known as amending the Constitution. Any addition is treated as extra language added on to the end of the Constitution and is known as a constitutional amendment. Surprisingly, we have only 27 constitutional amendments. That's because amending the Constitution is a complicated process. The Constitution's Article 5 lays out the process by which the Constitution may be amended. There are actually 4 different ways, but only one is widely used. Proposal by convention of the states, with ratification by state conventions. This method has never been used. Proposal by convention of the states, with ratification by state legislatures. This method has also never been used. Proposal by Congress, with ratification by state conventions. This method has been used one time. Proposal by Congress, with ratification by the state legislatures. This method was used for all current amendments except one. Let's take a look at the more common methods. The first step requires that a constitutional amendment be suggested. Most commonly, this means a federal legislator or legislative committee puts forward a bill asking for an amendment. To be officially proposed, the bill must pass both houses of legislature with a 2/3 majority in each. Notice that the entire Congress is involved in this process. When both the House of Representatives and the Senate approve by a 2/3 majority vote, it's known as a joint resolution. This is the way all of our current constitutional amendments have been proposed. However, there is a second way in which a constitutional amendment may be proposed. 2/3 of the states can ask Congress to call a constitutional convention in order to propose amendments. A constitutional convention is simply a gathering for the purpose of writing a new constitution or revising an existing constitution. Again, note that this method has never been used to amend our Constitution. Once the bill passes both houses, the proposed amendment goes to the individual states for their consideration. Notice that the proposed amendment doesn't need the President's signature like other bills. Instead, the proposed amendment passes directly to the states. This step is called ratification. To be ratified, 3/4 of the state legislatures must approve the proposed amendment. This is the method used in almost all of our current amendments. Only the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition, was ratified through ratifying conventions. This means the bill required 3/4 of the states to approve the proposed amendment by holding special state legislative gatherings. Starting with the 18th Amendment, the Supreme Court held that states must ratify a proposed amendment within some reasonable time. However, the reasonable amount of time has never been specifically defined. For the 18th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd Amendments, Congress set the ratification period at 7 years. Other amendments didn't have a specified time period. Note that thousands of these bills asking for an amendment have been considered over the past 2 centuries. Of those, only 33 received the necessary 2/3 vote in Congress to become an officially proposed amendment. Of those, only 27 were ratified to become constitutional amendments. Now let's take a look at some of our most famous constitutional amendments. Keep in mind that all amendments were made for a specific reason, like overruling a Supreme Court decision or compelling a societal change. Our first 10 constitutional amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. The first Congress considered these 10 amendments at its first meeting. When ratifying the Constitution, many states proposed that a Bill of Rights be added. This led to 17 suggested amendments, with 12 receiving the proper vote needed to become officially proposed amendments. The states ratified all but the first two in 1791, leaving 10 constitutional amendments. Notably, the second proposed amendment, which prevents members of Congress from granting themselves pay raises during the current session, was ratified in 1992 to become the 27th Amendment. This amendment clearly didn't have a specified time period for ratification. Briefly, our Bill of Rights includes the First Amendment, guaranteeing free speech and religion. The Second Amendment, granting the right to bear arms. The Third Amendment, concerning the quartering of troops. The Fourth Amendment, granting rights against search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment, preventing double jeopardy and self-incrimination. The Sixth Amendment, guaranteeing a jury and the right to confront witnesses in criminal trials. The Seventh Amendment, guaranteeing a jury in civil trials. The Eighth Amendment, preventing cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Amendment, acknowledging that the people have rights other than those spelled out in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment, allowing all rights not specifically granted to the federal government to be handled by the states. Since the enactment of the Bill of Rights in 1791, 17 more constitutional amendments have been ratified. Let's take a quick look at some of the most familiar. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery. The 15th Amendment ensured that a person's race, color, or history as a slave couldn't be used to keep that person from voting. The 18th Amendment established Prohibition. The 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, allowed women the right to vote. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment instituting Prohibition and was ratified in 1933 by state convention. The 26th Amendment was a response to the Vietnam War draft. It was ratified in 1971 and set the minimum voting age at 18. Let's review. A constitutional amendment is extra language added onto the end of the Constitution that adds to or changes the Constitution. The Constitution's Article 5 lays out the process by which the Constitution may be amended. There are actually 4 different ways, but only one is widely used. First, the amendment must be proposed. To be officially proposed, the bill must pass both houses of the legislature with a 2/3 majority in each. This action is known as a joint resolution because both the House of Representatives and the Senate approve by a 2/3 majority vote. Alternatively, 2/3 of the states can ask Congress to call a constitutional convention in order to propose amendments, though this method has never been used. Next, the proposed amendment must be ratified. This means that 3/4 of the state legislatures must approve the proposed amendment. This is the method used in almost all of our current amendments. Only the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition, was ratified through state ratifying conventions. Though the Supreme Court held that states must ratify a proposed amendment within some reasonable time, the reasonable time has never been specifically defined. What was originally proposed to be our Second Amendment was ratified 200 years later to become the 27th Amendment. Remember that all amendments were made for a specific reason, like overruling a Supreme Court decision or compelling a societal change. Our first 10 constitutional amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. These were ratified together in 1791, which was just 2 years after the Constitution became effective.
The Bill of Rights is very important. Every American, whether able to recite them or not, enjoys the protections laid out by the founders. There were originally actually 12 amendments, but it was the right-assuring list of 10 that made it into the Constitution. There is no need to memorize each one, but I suggest you familiarize yourself with each. The following is simply a list of a summary of the first 10 amendments. Knowing what each guarantees is important. Amendment 1. This guarantees the freedom of religion, speech, press, and peaceable assembly. Amendment 2. This guarantees the right to bear arms. This doesn't mean tickets to the gun show. Well, not that gun show anyway. The meaning of the Second Amendment today is one of the most debated issues. Some say that it only gives the right to bear arms to maintain a militia. Today, that would be handled by the military and police forces. Others say it means for hunting and defense. All Americans are given the right to own whatever guns they want. It is best if you read the exact text and make an informed decision for yourself. Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Amendment 3. This guarantees no quartering of soldiers without the consent of the homeowner. The Third Amendment is hard for us to understand today because of the rights we all enjoy. No one has ever made an American in the 21st century put up a soldier for the night. But housing the military was something colonials had to do before and during the Revolution. This amendment guarantees you will not have to feed and house soldiers against your will. Imagine if we didn't have the Third Amendment, a group of soldiers just showing up at midnight and demanding that they get your kids' beds for the night. Amendment 4. This amendment guarantees the freedom from unreasonable searches and seizure. The Fourth Amendment is pretty direct. If the police or another government agency want to search you, your possessions, or your property, or take your stuff, they need a warrant. Now, if an officer has obvious reason, they can search an individual. But if they want to go through your home or stuff, generally speaking, the Fourth Amendment means authorities will have to go to a judge and convince them they have good reason, and that the search is reasonable. Amendment 5. The right to due process of law, freedom from self-incrimination, and double jeopardy. This means you can't be tried twice for the same crime. The Fifth Amendment is sometimes misinterpreted by people. Double jeopardy is simple. Due process makes sense. But sometimes you'll hear someone say, "I plead the Fifth," when they don't want to answer a question. This only applies if the answer implicates you in a crime. If you saw your friend steal a candy bar, by law, you have to answer a question about that. Otherwise, you could get in trouble for obstructing justice or conspiracy or something. If you stole the candy bar with your friend, you can refuse to answer the questions because it could incriminate you. Amendment 6. The rights of those accused of a crime, such as the right to a speedy and public trial and the right to have an attorney. If you like cop shows or have some experience with being arrested, you are familiar with some of these rights. The Sixth Amendment says they can't make you sit in jail for 10 years awaiting trial. As you should know from those cop shows, you can and should always ask for an attorney. Under the Sixth Amendment, you aren't guaranteed a good lawyer, but at least they should know the law better than most. Amendment 7. This is the right of trial by jury in civil cases. Realize that civil cases aren't the same as criminal cases. Civil cases are when people sue each other. If a civil case is over a lot of money, the Seventh Amendment says it is to be tried by a jury. For example, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty for the murder of his wife in the criminal case, but he was found guilty in the wrongful death suit filed by his wife's family. Civil court can't send you to jail, but they can make you pay. It only takes a majority decision to be found in the wrong for civil cases. In Simpson's case, he had to pay his wife's family millions of dollars. Amendment 8. The freedom from excessive bail, cruel and unusual punishments. The Eighth Amendment is simple. If you stole that candy bar, they can't say you have a $50 million bail, or else you'll stay in jail until after you're found not guilty. Also, if found guilty, they cannot torture you. Amendment 9. The rights not listed may exist, and just because they are not listed doesn't mean they can be violated. The Ninth Amendment says any right that a person obviously has cannot be denied because it isn't in this list. As an example, the Bill of Rights does not explicitly state you have the right to eat a candy bar, but the Ninth Amendment basically guarantees you that right. Amendment 10. The powers not given to the federal government by the Constitution are retained by the states. Remember, the states were very nervous about giving away their power to the federal government. The 10th Amendment states that everything that isn't expressly stated as controlled by the federal government is still handled by the states. Today, this works very well when politicians in the national government want to wash their hands of a political issue. Because of the 10th Amendment, several hot-button issues are decided by the states. Okay, so to recap the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is one of the most important documents in history, and this Bill of Rights is important because the Constitution would never have been signed without it. But not only did the Bill of Rights get the Constitution ratified, it guaranteed the rights of U.S. citizens in a way that had never been done before. The rights of U.S. citizens are still protected as much or more than anywhere else on Earth.
Have you ever noticed how many laws we have in the United States? We have laws from our federal government, our state governments, and our local governments. How do we know who's in charge? The United States government is based on federalism. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. Each person in the United States is subject to the laws of that city, county, state, and our federal government. In a federalist government, the power is divided between the national government and other governmental units. In the U.S., this means the power is divided between our federal government and our state and local governments. This is different from a unitary government, where one unit holds the power. It's also different from a confederation, which is an association of independent governmental units. The Articles of Confederation originally established the United States as a confederation, where each of the states operated separately and independently from one another. The United States Constitution sets up our current federal government and replaced the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution recognizes the federal government as the highest governmental power, though it also acknowledges that the American people are subject to several different powers. After almost a decade operating under the Articles of Confederation, the framers of our Constitution realized that the states had too much power. They felt they needed a different system. They wished to create a stronger federal government. The result was a balance of powers between the states and the federal government, with the federal government clearly in charge. This is the system of federalism we still use today. The Constitution expressly grants broad powers to the federal government, but not to the states. Instead, the Constitution stresses what the states can't do. The addition of the Bill of Rights, including the 10th Amendment, helped temper some of this imbalance. The 10th Amendment gave the states all powers not delegated to the national government or denied to the states. In other words, under federalism, the states get to regulate whatever is left over. For example, Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress certain powers, such as coining money and declaring war. The following section prohibits the states from such things as coining money and declaring war. The Supremacy Clause is an important part of federalism. This clause is the section of the Constitution stating that the Constitution and federal laws are the supreme law of the land. The framers recognized the weak federal government established by the Articles of Confederation and wanted to ensure the states wouldn't ever overpower the federal government again. The Supremacy Clause is a guarantee that no laws will interfere with the goals of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause is found in Article 6, Section 2, where the Constitution specifies which powers the federal government has and which powers the federal government does not have. When a state law conflicts with a federal law, the Supremacy Clause operates to invalidate the state law in favor of the federal one, as long as the federal law is found to be in pursuance of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause also means that states can't regulate, interfere with, or control federal issues. This principle comes from the famous 1819 Supreme Court case of McCulloch versus Maryland. Here, the court held that Maryland could not constitutionally tax the operations of the Bank of the United States, since that was a federal power. It may seem as though the Supremacy Clause and 10th Amendment work together to draw a clear line between state and federal powers. However, sometimes a state and the federal government will battle for power in a certain area. Through the Supremacy Clause and concepts of federalism, we know that federal law trumps state law. However, we don't always know whether or not a state has a duty to enforce federal laws. The United States Supreme Court settles these disputes. The Supreme Court is the highest federal court in the U.S. and is responsible for interpreting constitutional powers. One example is the 2000 Supreme Court case of Reno versus Condon, where United States Attorney General Janet Reno sued South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon. Reno wanted South Carolina to enforce the Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994, which set certain federal regulations on driver information. These regulations prevented states from disclosing a driver's personal information without the driver's consent. South Carolina laws allowed the state to sell this information. Condon refused to enforce the act, arguing that the 10th Amendment reserved the regulation of drivers to the states. Condon argued that the act violated principles of federalism, since the regulation of drivers is not mentioned in the Constitution. The Supreme Court, however, sided with the federal government. The court said that Congress could regulate this area because Congress is responsible for regulating interstate commerce, and driver information was an article of interstate commerce. Let's review. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. In the U.S., this means that the federal government, state governments, and local entities share powers over the citizens. Our constitutional framers recognized that the Articles of Confederation made the states too strong and the federal government too weak. They purposely created a federalist government through the United States Constitution. The Constitution's Supremacy Clause tells us that federal laws will usually supersede any state laws or local ordinances. The Supremacy Clause ensures that the Constitution is the highest or supreme law. The 10th Amendment gives some power back to the states, though only those powers that were not already granted to the federal government. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Do you recognize these words? Of course you do. This is the preamble of our United States Constitution. Remember that the preamble tells us why the framers wrote the Constitution and why they chose this particular form of government. The framers wanted to form a more centralized government, while allowing the states to continue to govern most matters themselves. They also wished to prevent the national government from exercising too much power over the people. That's why the framers developed federalism. Federalism is a division of power between the federal government and the individual state governments. Each government has responsibilities over the matters that are best addressed at that level of government. For example, the states handle many things themselves, but the federal government handles items like our national defense and interstate commerce. Like most concepts, federalism has evolved over the course of American history. Some important events have shaped the balance between the national and state governments, so that federalism best suits the needs of the country at that time. While federalism is no less important today, it has changed substantially from its first years. Let's take a look at federalism's early years. When the Constitution first took effect in 1788, it established a system of dual federalism. This meant that the states each have their responsibilities, and the national government has its responsibilities. Under dual federalism, the responsibilities rarely overlapped. That's why this system is also sometimes referred to as layer cake federalism. Dual federalism leans on the 10th Amendment, which states that all powers not constitutionally given to the federal government are reserved to the states. In other words, the federal government's powers are limited. Generally speaking, the national government only managed the national defense, foreign policy, and interstate commerce. The states were free to manage their economic regulation, criminal law, and other local matters. This system of federalism was used for a long time. Dual federalism reigned from the time the Constitution was enacted all the way through World War II. Note, though, that federalism wasn't idle during that long period. Different historical events helped shape dual federalism. For example, the Civil War was a war between the states over slavery and concerns over federalism. During the Civil War, several southern states seceded, forming the Confederacy. These states argued that the state governments could legally make their own laws regarding slavery, and that they didn't have to abide by federal laws on that matter. Notice that this is an argument over federalism. Furthermore, many Southerners felt that the state governments held power over the federal government, since the states created the federal government. Again, this is an argument over which system holds the most power. Note that the Union won the war over the Confederacy. The Union's victory ended this federalism debate and further established that the federal government reigns supreme over the state governments. A few years later, this concept was solidified through the 14th Amendment, which limits state powers and protects the basic rights of citizens. For example, the 14th Amendment includes the Due Process Clause. This clause specifically limits the state's ability to deprive citizens of fundamental legal rights and expands the federal government's authority. After the Civil War, dual federalism started its long wind down. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the federal government continued to gain power. By the 1930s, state rights were further limited, and the federal government established greater power through new federal legislation. This era is sometimes referred to as marble cake federalism, since federal powers began to seep into the state's area. After the stock market crash of 1929, the United States experienced the Great Depression. This was a severe economic downturn affecting countries throughout the world. In the U.S., the Great Depression brought failing businesses, alarmingly high unemployment rates, and widespread poverty. As a response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. The New Deal was aggressive legislation implementing several programs and policies geared toward reviving the economy. For example, New Deal legislation increased the regulation of banking and commerce and added social programs to alleviate poverty. The legislation added new tasks and responsibilities to the federal government, thus growing its power. As a result, the states lost the power to regulate these areas. Roosevelt's New Deal legislation was enacted in waves throughout his first term of presidency. Roosevelt's first term ended in 1937, and the last of the New Deal was officially enacted in 1938. Let's review. The framers developed federalism, which is a division of power between the federal government and the individual state governments. Our first system is known as dual federalism, which means that the states have their responsibilities and the national government has its responsibilities. This is largely based on the 10th Amendment, which states that all powers not constitutionally given to the federal government are reserved to the states. Because the powers rarely overlapped, this system is sometimes called layer cake federalism. During the Civil War, some states argued that the state governments could legally make their own laws regarding slavery. This federalism debate was settled when the Union won and established the federal government as the nation's highest power. The 14th Amendment was enacted after the war and limits state powers and protects the basic rights of citizens. By the 1930s, dual federalism became characterized as marble cake federalism. The New Deal brought new federal legislation implementing several programs and policies geared toward reviving the economy. The federal government further expanded to include these new tasks and responsibilities.
So I think that's it. But ain't that something? Almost at the end of the video, I realized the audio was low. So then I turned it up when I made that video. So that's why I got louder. But that's crazy. I must have been in the other room recording it while I was watching the show in a separate room. I do that so I don't have to sit through every video. I would go to the next room and watch my show. And then let's say this was 56 minutes. So I would set an alarm to like 56 minutes to remind me to go back and shut it off, but yeah, so it was low, but great history right there. More context or an insight on the constitutional rights, the amendments, the war, what happened before, what happened during. You had Confederate articles, then the Constitution replaced that. The war was won by the Union, therefore we got federalism and the states had more power than the government. The government gained the power over the states. The states want to do what they want to do. The states, if you look into the recession, you'll see that when it was dealing with the states, we had all type of different currencies, right? So something, and let's just say California currency wasn't necessarily the same currency or the same value in, let's say, Texas. So it was like all over the place. Bank runs, a whole bunch of stuff you could read into. And maybe we'll do that one later. But so that's something that, you could put in the back of your mind. It's something to reference later on. Just turn your speakers up and we will dialogue. So descent, yes, like I was saying, I was chased out of a library from a Karen. Well, a certain portion of the library that I always had access to, right? The public has access to. I went upstairs to complain, and the Karens upstairs said I was right. She had no right to do that. But once the Karen downstairs came upstairs to talk to the Karen upstairs, all of a sudden, all the Karens agreed that the downstairs Karen was right. And a police officer was at the library already. They have a library cop, and he acted like he didn't weigh in. He acted like, yeah, I guess what they're saying is correct. So I just left peacefully. When I started to watch those auditors and see what they went to, like all federal buildings, government buildings, and when I see them going to libraries, and they could actually record, because I was told you can't do none of that, and I felt like they could kick me out for no reason. That's because I'm not from that township. So I felt like that was the case. Man, I start watching these auditor videos and I see you can actually go in the library and you have a right to be there and all that. And you can hold them liable if they try to violate that right. Man. in my mind, I was like, oh, cha-ching. Because this woman, she's a very aggressive, hostile Karen. I'm talking about as soon as she sees me, face get red, no, and start coming at me. So believe me, if she got that same energy, if she ain't dead from COVID-19, this is going to go viral. She's going to be very, very aggressive. And if you see that camera, she might even attack me. So stay tuned for that. So I was saying that, yeah, they could definitely, the police officer could be on some bull and put you in handcuffs anyway and take you, to the police department, to the jail anyway, even though you didn't do anything. They can do that. And as you can see, they shoot people, so they can do what they want. That's what I'm trying to say. Got to have bail money just in case they pull the BS, take you downtown and put you in jail for 2 to 3 days, whatever they be doing, or a day, hours, whatever it is. So I'm looking at the extreme that can happen. You dig? But that's going to be a large civil case right there, because if she's still there with the same energy, she is going to violate my Constitution, my constitutional rights. She is going to do that. That's a fact. Right? So you're right. Most people listen to cops, never challenge them, and cops take advantage of that. That's normal, right? It's called perceived power. Right. When they see that camera, they back down. Most of them, the smart ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show various, later on, I'm going to go through various auditing videos where only the ones where the cops and the people got aggressive and they thought they had power and they got debunked. Like a higher authority came in, like a lieutenant sergeant, whatever, came in and was like, nah, that's not going to happen. Now, I don't want to say the city because I don't want them to get a heads up. So I'm purposely not saying the city, the library, because even though you might be, supportive, you got haters out there, and, they might give them a heads up and nothing happens. You know what I mean? So now I want her to keep that same energy. I want her to violate my constitutional rights again, this time on record. And I want to hold that city accountable, So I'm going to withhold that. But trust me, man, this is an easy one. This is an easy bag right here. So I just need her to be alive. You dig? Because I guarantee you, she's of a mindset where the vaccines are a hoax. The government's trying to control us. Just wear a mask, or no, don't even wear a mask. Just hydrochloroquine and bleach. Believe me, she's in that mind state. That Trump stuff, that Proud Boy stuff. Yeah. So anyway, the video I showed you guys with the guy, the Long Island auditor, I want to try to hook up with him since he's already in the neighborhood, right? I want to try to get him to go with me. Now it's gonna be difficult because he doesn't know me from a can of paint. So I got to figure out how to reach out to him. And if he's still around the area, and if I tell my story, I'm sure, if I tell him like what I told you just now, I'm sure he's going to be down. And I just got to make sure she's actually there. I don't want to waste the trip. So I'm going to go there first, and she's going to get crazy. And I'm going to talk to her like, no, I'm leaving. I'm sorry. I'm leaving. I didn't mean to bother you. I'm going to say, but I have a question about a book. When the next time you're here, so I said, no, I'll ask you later because I'm in a rush. And I'm going to tell her that I want to question her about a book. And then something like that. And then you'll see. So I'm going to get her the next time she's there, the time, whatever, and we're going to get her. Yeah, so I'm going to contact him. I don't have nothing, no online work all this week because of the holidays. So I'm going to reach out to him and see if we can get this going. But stay tuned for that, man. And of course, he's definitely going to be on board when he knows a bag is is at the end of the rainbow. Because she's going to do it, and she's going to do the extreme, the whole. Just be on lookout for the whole Karen, all the Karen tactics, all the Karen antics. She might even yell rape in there. Believe me, she's gonna do all. She's an extremist. And I noticed that she's just not racist towards me. When I was actually in there, when she tolerated me, she was nasty to certain other like non-whites. I heard of my own, and then I said, "Wow, she ain't just racist towards black. She hate everybody who ain't white." But now I'm telling you, bro, I wouldn't tell you. Once I seen those order videos, I knew I had one. I said, I got her. I got her. She's gonna fall right for it. And she's gonna cause a big scene. She's gonna get the police officers to probably act unprofessionally as well, which is gonna make it way worse. But she's out of there, believe me. I'm gonna get her fired. She's out of there. If she behaves that way, if she violates my constitutional right, I'm going to get her fired. I'm with the support of viewership, attorneys or whatever. I'm gonna get her out of there. And I'm gonna go back and sit down. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm actually gonna go back and sit down and look around like, who else? You dig? So anyway, I'm gonna be back on. I'm gonna do my coffee run. You dig? So I'll be back. And I want to share more videos.